So we're working on flat water this morning, and so we're using the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna along with the white, and we're going to do a blend in the water. We're going to do it vertically. So we've got a lot more water than what we have in the reference. I put the focus on the water. And so we're doing this before the sky. Just so it allows us to go over. We do have a landmass that can take out some of our problems there. Just paint that side while I have the paint. And we're going to deliberately try to put streaks in. I didn't intend on that red streak, but that's not a problem. We can blend that out. So there's more light in this center portion. So I'm going over that horizon line just to be sure that I'm not short of this blend. This is not something we want to have to go back in later and adjust. And before I give that a chance to dry, I'm going to take a dry brush and I'm just going to smooth out that blend, not trying to get rid of the streaks, which we are often trying to get rid of. We just want some mild streaks, and if we don't have enough there, we can just throw one in like that and then just soften it down a bit. So we're going to come in, continue on with this. I started with the light side because it's hard to take out the dark reflections out of the light colors once it's laid down there. So we're going to probably use the phthalo blue with the burnt sienna to create the dark green of the trees on the shore there. But we don't want to do that because it will get much too green when it's mixing with the light colors that we're putting in here. I used my dry brush to paint. This is a dry brush now. Just trying to get this darker near the shore. Back to the dry brush. Not dragging that right through. So I've redrawn the horizon line. I've lowered it a little bit. Just I was thinking it was maybe a bit high. So we're going to ignore the landmass and we're going to put in that gray sky. I think we'll make that a little bluer. And we don't have to worry too much about that line just because we're going to be putting a landmass in there. And so then the bottom of that cloud is a little darker. And one thing about value, when you're using value, if the values are very close together, it can have a blurred look. And so we are going to blur that bottom edge of that cloud a little bit, but we don't have to get the fact that the values are very close together is going to help that. So we're just going to run that brush along the bottom there. Now we're not going to do the top part of this cloud because the part above that is actually behind that. Usually when you're working with clouds, what is closest to the horizon is farthest away. But in this particular case, these clouds up here, let's actually use some paint. Are farther back. And taking this cloud in behind the tree is just in case we have some sky holes that we want to use. We're going to add a little bit of yellow ochre to the light sky in the picture, as it's appears to be almost clear, but it definitely has a little bit of sunshine effect. And yellow ochre is a great color to, and I do mean very little, it's a great color to give the idea of sunshine. If you use the yellow light or a yellow deep, it just looks a little too brassy. So, and you can see this is not a lot. It's just slightly, I'll run that in there. And so yellow is a visual complement to the blue. So we're dealing with a very blue-gray. So the yellow in the sky also enhances that. Well, they enhance each other. The blue makes the yellow look yellower, and the yellow makes the blue look bluer. Now, a lot of you are thinking, wait a minute, orange is the complement to blue. But yellow is the visual complement, and that is the most extreme complement. red is actually the only, a warm red is the only color that the visual and the mixing complement are the same color. So we're going to come back into the gray again. Not enough yellow in that color to really worry about it turning green on us. The burnt sienna is a bit stronger than the ultramarine blue, so when you're adding the burnt sienna, you need to have a little bit lighter touch than you might have. That's much too dark. This paint is quite wet, so I'm not blending it very much yet. I'm just going to switch to a small filbert. And so we're just going to start to blend that now. Sometimes you want to wait for the paint to dry up a little bit, or at least start to set the yellow sky that we put in there was quite wet. And we just really want to soften the edges a little bit. And when you're doing skies like this, you really, I mean, this is not the focus of the video, but you really need to pay attention to the condition of the paint before you really start getting into blending too much. Too wet and it just gets a big mess, or mushy, and too dry and it won't blend. So I think that is probably set up enough down below. Taking the paint off the brush. Don't want to add any water at this point to the paint. We just didn't want to add any more paint. So I'm just working with the paint that is actually already on the canvas. That's starting to get a little bit dry there, so we can get a little bit more aggressive. And we'll start coming in down the bottom. I think we'll one of the ways to blend two colors into another is to actually mix a third color and blend that into both. So I've made a middle value gray there. putting the lighter color down and then coming back, letting it set up just a little bit, and come back in and blend that, taking the paint off the brush now. So we're just going to work with what we've laid down. Don't lay down too much or you won't have time to blend what you laid down. So we're going to do the a lot of the next part is going to be glazes on the water. So we're just going to, the water has had enough time to dry that we shouldn't have a problem. So we're just running that along there, and then we're going to get so those are pretty heavy glazes, which we're going to and you should be able to still see the streaking that we did on the undercoat through the glaze, but not too much. We're just going to switch brushes here. And so you can see I've got a little mark here that I'm not that crazy about. So that's a good place to put the next glaze. So we're going to get that brush just a little wet this time, just to soften It's not white that we're putting in there just yet. We will come back and put some of that yellow sky color in. So I inadvertently hit that phthalo blue there, and you can see the remnants there, but I wanted to clean that up. So the glazing is really any transparent application of paint, whether you use a glazing medium, which I never do, or I prefer the control I have with water. But you're just making the paint so thin that you can see through what you've done. So we're just going to a little bit of thick paint there. So we're going to let that dry before we come in and do the next glaze. So we're mixing up a real dark over here. Too much white contamination there. So I've cleaned the brush and I'm just going to stretch some lines out there a little bit. Don't have to worry too much about this because we're going to be doing a fair amount of cross blending. The paint is a little bit wet from the Stay Wet palette. I'm running it a little too wet. So we're going to start putting in some of the background land. So I'm mixing the phthalo blue and burnt sienna, and we're just going to add a little bit of white to that. We don't want to see, and I think we're going to add a little bit of ultramarine. We don't want this too dark, but we also don't want it too green, because not only does value fade in the distance, but so does hue. So we're going to try this. I think that brush is just going to be too big. I'll switch to number 6 rigger. Going to add a lot more ultramarine blue because that's looking a little too green. Just switch to a number 1 rigger. Gonna have to get rid of some of these brushes there. Showing lots of hairs. So we're not going to put a lot of detail on this island. Just enough to suggest that there might be trees growing on that. This is a photo from north of Superior. So we're going lighter and a little bluer. We still want to have some green to that. So this is the much more distant shore or distant island. I'm guessing island because we're looking out towards the American side. This is certainly not the far shore. Lake Superior is an enormous lake. I think that needs to be we're just going to go over that portion because it was much too light. Keep hitting the white there. I'm likely going to go over that again. I'm really not that thrilled with what I did. Mostly it's just a little too mottled. So now we're going to mix the burnt sienna and phthalo blue. Come back to the rigger, and we're just going to, I don't think I like that brush very much. Nothing like a brand new brush, but I'm nearly new. This is a little bit newer and hasn't been abused quite so much by myself. So I'm looking to the reference to get ideas of how to make So this is where I painted that sky so I could deliberately leave some negative space between the trees. These trees along these shores often have quite a windswept character to them, as the winds off the lake can really beat them into submission or into a certain direction. Storms, although I have never experienced one, I hear can be quite fierce off this Lake Superior, off all the Great Lakes, but especially Superior. And the winter storms that much more severe. Try and keep these really nice and straight. This tool I'm using is described in the glazing sun rays video. Sorry, I had to think about which one it was in. And it is also thoroughly described in my book on techniques, which of course you should all have. I think we might stretch those trees up a little higher a little later. Now that those distant trees have dried up a bit, I'm going to go over them again. Make the color a little bit lighter. The value of distant areas can often be difficult because you're looking at the color you've mixed and you think, oh, that's too light. Like right now, I'm thinking this is too light, but I'm pretty sure it's going to dry just the right. We want it to stand out, but we want to give the illusion that this is a little bit grayed by the weather, but also grayed by the distance. So I'm just going to clean up that line there a little bit. I've got this tipped forward just to, as this is kind of particular work and the working flat on the table is a little bit difficult. So we're just doing the micro ripples in the foreground. I think we'll call that done.